great pleasure. Let's head over to the phones and welcome Noah Rothman from HotAir.com. Noah, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking time out of your day to be on the show. Love HotAir.com. Love the things that you write. Just went through one of your pieces not a few minutes ago about Michael Brown's stepfather under investigation and many other things.
Yeah, actually, this clip kind of went viral the day after the Ferguson riots. It was following a rather anguished statement delivered by Michael Brown's mother to a crowd of supporters. Michael Brown's stepfather, a gentleman by the name of Lewis Head, got up and, equally distraught, started screaming that the crowd should burn this blank down, burn this blank down. And the crowd responded. Even Antonio French, a rather popular local alderman who's become a national figure in the wake of these controversies since August at least, said that, quote, the mood of the crowd changed in the wake of those comments. And they may have precipitated some of this violence. At least that's what prosecutors are beginning to investigate. Now, is there any real solid evidence that there was incitement to violence here? Probably not. Incitement to violence requires the proving, being able to found really rather clearly that there was an intent to cause violence, an intent to start riotous violence, and I don't believe that it's provable that you could prove intent here. Nevertheless, it may have had an impact on the nature and the level of violence, and investigations probably merited, but I can't foresee any charges coming down.
Noah Rothman with us from HotAir.com. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. Following on Twitter, at Noah C. Rothman, there's been this, especially over the past week, I know it's been building for a while, but the reaction to the way the media is covering stories, the ones they pay attention to, the ones they ignore when they are digging through high school columns of Elizabeth Lauton, the staffer who posted had a Facebook post about the Obama daughters, and someone staking out her parents' house, and the Washington Post assigns a foreign affairs reporter to dig into her past, and yet they can't be bothered to talk about Jonathan Gruber or this Democrat staffer who just been convicted on sexual abuse charges. This is not good, and I mean that. We make fun of the media at times, but it's not good. It's corrosive, I think, to the way that people are taking in the news.
Yeah, it's very hard to understand exactly what's happening here. I was saying last night that it really feels like something happened since the election in the press, and the focus has just gone right off the rails. You forgot to mention in your litany of things that the press is not covering with the scrutiny that they've devoted to an obscure GOP staffer who has subjectively insulted the children of the President of the United States, an Obama bundler, who is accused of child molestation. This is the kind of thing that, were a Republican, it would unquestionably be a significant story. Yesterday, the Department of Justice determined that one of the president's very close friends, and very close, they spend birthdays together, they're courtside, they go golfing, is going to be treated as a hostile witness in a corruption case, one of at least 5 or 6 that this individual has been very close to, if not directly involved with. And these are things that I've been in political media since 2010, and I've never heard of. I just educated myself on them today. There's an ambassador to Hungary who's been appointed yesterday, who's a former producer for the Bold and the Beautiful, I believe, who also just bought this position. She's going to be confirmed by the Senate. And Hungary is a very hot area. It's a significantly important country, and it's falling into a form of political rightism that is very disturbing. It's akin to a militaristic fascism. And it's something that should be on the watch list of everybody. And appointing a nobody who doesn't know anything about the country is disturbing. And ABC News ran a report on this yesterday, and the focus of their report was John McCain. And he is upset with this nomination. Not the context of this nominee, or the dereliction of a responsibility to appoint an actual competent nominee, but the Republicans who are opposed to it. And that's corrupt. That's 100% corrupt. And like you've said, it's deleterious to the Republic, because it fosters misinformation, and it fosters the impression that this is just business as usual. It's not. This isn't right.
It's almost turned on its head, Noah, in which the media, by and large, is only concerned with stories that fit a narrative they are trying to tell. and not stories that might break out of the narrative, stories that are different, stories that are unique, stories that paint things in a different light. They don't care about any of that unless it fits the narrative they are already trying to tell. It is odd.
Yeah, odd is one way to put it. Disturbing is something that I think I'll lean towards, and I'm not exactly sure what's happening here. It's a phenomenon that I'm not familiar with, as I said. But again, I think it was something that happened around the elections. For those who, maybe even unconsciously, are predetermined to give the benefit of the doubt to Democrats, they've witnessed a reversal of fortunes from 2008 that is so stunning that it really can't even be defined outside of a historical context that requires a 100-year lens. You really have to go back to the Harding administration to see a time when the Republicans had as much power as they're going to have in 2015. And it's all the result of the collapse of the Obama presidency and the Obama ideal. And I really believe that if you bought into that, you are so disheartened, so shocked that your worldview has not panned out in a way that is so spectacularly imploded that it's really hard to come to terms with, that I think we're starting to see something akin to a denial, a form of projection and denial on the part of news producers, if not reporters themselves, producers, editors, the individuals who assign these stories to the unsung correspondents who actually have to carry out the grunt work. And that's a theory that I guess I'm working with. But beyond that, it's really inexplicable.
You know, and back to the ambassadorship for a minute, maybe you could shed a little further light on this one, because I was reading during the, obvious criticisms of putting the bold and beautiful producer Colleen Bell in as ambassador, that the administration's track record on this is such now that most of our major ambassadorships around the world are just political, and we don't have people with foreign service experience at all in the majority of them.
Yeah, and those who would defend the Obama administration say that this isn't a unique condition, that if you serve as a bundler, you buy, or a fundraiser in general, you can buy an ambassadorship. It's a rather cushy position. It doesn't require a whole ton of knowledge about the state of affairs on the ground, at least in certain places, because the actual work of diplomacy is done by professional diplomats who are going to be serving under this ambassador, and the ambassadorship is really just a ceremonial position. That having been said, we lost in essentially combat the first American ambassador to a nation since 1979 in 2012. It's become a slightly more, we're in a dangerous time. It's a more dangerous world. And I think it's irresponsible to pretend that we can do business as usual as we did in the 1990s and even in 2000 by just appointing bundlers and political hacks and operatives to positions of such influence, particularly in places that are really significant, like Hungary, which is having some significant political turmoil, like appointing Caroline Kennedy to serve as the ambassador to Japan. It's just not. It doesn't comport with good governance.
Noah Rothman with us from HotAir.com. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. Something else that's been creeping up, and again, it's shown in the Ferguson coverage, where the facts are largely inconsequential to many, because the argument goes, look at the bigger picture, the larger truth we're trying to talk about here. And we see that in the coverage, and a lot of the reaction to the Rolling Stone story, too, which we talked about yesterday on the show, the Virginia gang rape, planned gang rape, this awful, awful story in Rolling Stone, where the details are very fuzzy, and the author of the piece is saying, don't worry about the facts here. Don't ask questions about the facts. You're missing the larger point, the greater truth we're trying to talk about here, about sexual abuse on campus. And I keep hearing that argument. Don't worry about the specific facts. I want to talk about what it means on a larger scale. And I think that's a bad path to go down, too.
That's a very astute observation. It's one that I've started to see a lot myself. When the facts aren't on your side, forget the facts. Let's talk about this larger subjective condition, truth that somehow is what I was trying to get at with facts don't necessarily really comport to the story I'm trying to tell. And the individual in the case you're talking about is the Rolling Stone interview. She told the Washington Post that what what the public should really, what the media especially should really be focusing on is the culture of corruption at universities in general, which, if not tacitly condone, then at least hide cultures of rape and molestation and sexual assault. She can't point to the evidentiary burden necessary to prove her charge, because the only extent that she went to contact the actual supposed perpetrators of this assault was an outdated campus directory, from which she got no real details. She really has several sources, all of whom are accusers, and she's never talked to any of the perpetrators. So her fact base is a little thin. So of course she goes and says, well, I'd prefer that you speak about the larger narrative truth here, this great whole from which is impossible to falsify. It's just basically a statement of faith. And it's a very powerful statement of faith, and one that is supported primarily on the left and those with like minds, ideologically simpatico reporters and editors, who also agree that there's some certain biases. And I'm actually quoting a blog. I'm summarizing a blog post here, and I forget the author's name, but it's in a post on Hot Air, who says that this story, this UVA story, plays into some natural biases that people in the Acela corridor, particularly in the Northeast, have. Mm-hmm. That the South in general is friendly towards this kind of criminality, that fraternities incubate toxic masculinity, and that young men in general are just dangerous. And all of these things are supported by this fantastical narrative about 7 young men gang raping a young woman on a pile of broken glass. A fantastic story, but it really doesn't seem to be holding up when scrutinized very heavily. So yeah, we want to talk about the larger truths that uphold our general predisposition towards those 3 biases that we described earlier, and that's very similar to what's happening in Ferguson. There are biases that are being confirmed. The facts be darned.
And like you're saying, and let's back up and look at the picture, the bigger picture from even further back. How many of these, because I know people have to wonder, how many of these stories where, well, upon scrutiny, it really all fell apart, but the media went all in on them, how many times in a row are we going to have, we're all in and we were wrong?
Well, how many times do you really hear we were wrong?
Well, you never do. It needs to be pointed out to them.
Yeah, exactly. And even when it is pointed out to them, there's sort of a grain of truth, and this is arguable, and that fact is sort of debatable. You'll never hear a real firm mea culpa. Never. And if they did, they would surrender the only currency the media has, which is a claim to authority. Once they lose the claim to authority, they've lost everything. There is virtually nothing now supporting the ideal that the media has of itself as an arbiter of facts and an arbiter of truth, beyond the fact that they have reach, they have influence, and they have the perceived authority to which people appeal, including myself. We all have to appeal to authority in this business, and the media has it. Once they lose that, with mea culpas, with not just corrections, but general, big, broad, we were wrong here on the whole truth thing, that's going to be the big problem, because you issue corrections all the time. Once you issue a correction that states unequivocally our entire worldview, formulated our coverage of this, really shaded our coverage of this entire incident, and the incident itself was wrong, and it was wrong because of our worldview, then they've lost all claim to authority.
Noah Rothman with us here. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. You can find Noah's stuff at HotAir.com. Also, Twitter at Noah C. Rothman. With a couple of weeks in the rearview mirror now, the Jonathan Gruber story, which was barely touched by a lot of the major networks, more coverage again to this Republican staffer in one day than combined on NBC for Jonathan Gruber admitting that they lied and the funding mechanism really is the middle class and we had to, otherwise we couldn't pass it. How does the Gruber story make the major networks, who ignored it for the most part, look in retrospect?
Well, I mean, it just depends on your perspective, right? My perspective is that it makes them look rather awful, just because they've ignored it intentionally for quite some time. They ignored it when it first was news. It required some financial advisor who just happened to devote a few hours to surfing YouTube in order to uncover these in the first place. Mm-hmm. And then when they went national, mostly on right-leaning sites, and with the occasional newsman like Jake Tapper devoting a significant amount of time to it, outside of that, very little coverage. And when probed on it, when they finally do deign to respond to this criticism, They say it's old news. We can't cover it. It's old news. It's not news. This happened in 2012, 2011, 2013. But you didn't cover it in the first place. So they get away with not covering it at all because it's obscure and not really relevant. And then when it is no longer obscure and supremely relevant, it's just old news. They can get away without covering it. So and the media has not covered itself in glory over this episode, or frankly a series of episodes in the last couple of weeks. It would behoove them to perform some introspection, considering how off the rails they've gone in recent weeks. But I don't foresee that happening anytime soon.
That would be nice. Noah Rothman, HotAir.com. Follow on Twitter. Read his stuff at Hot Air. Any chance you got, pick up something that Noah's written. You will learn something from it. Noah, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure.